Nowadays, the issue of repatriation is one of the most polemic debates that goes around art, history, and in diplomacy between countries. One of the most symbolic cases is the collection of Egyptian artifices located in the British Museum in London, United Kingdom, which is actually the world's most extensive collection of objects from that region. Particularly, the collection ranges from the cultures of the Nile Valley from the Neolithic period, which was around 10,000 years before Christ, until present day, displaying more than 100,000 objects. And among those, one of the most iconic perhaps is the so-called Rosetta Stone, a relic translated into several languages within the same document, and that symbolizes the relationship between the then ruling Ptolemies and a sect of Egyptian priests. And to understand the dispute, it is necessary to go back to the context of how this relic was, and I quote, acquired by the British. So we have a time when child labor, slavery, and colonialism from the West dominated several geographic regions, and the French under Napoleon Bonaparte and the British signed an agreement as London defeated Napoleon's army on Egyptian soil. And as part of this settlement, this stone and among dozens of other artifacts were handed to the British, and that ended up in the fact that nowadays the British Museum refuses to petitions to return the stone to its country of origin, arguing that the treaty was signed by an Egyptian representative of the time. According to Egyptians, of course, the museum's preservation of the relic represents a symbol of Western imperialism and a culture of violence, and they defend their sovereign right to ask for their cultural heritage. And they have promoted two petitions with thousands of signatures to ask for Rosetta Stone back. And I personally believe that these expropriations are a very illustrative summary of the effects that colonialism had on those places that underwent such a process. For example, the British built their first railway on foreign soil to cover the Cairo-Alexandria route, while the French financed the construction of the Suez Canal to connect the Mediterranean Sea to the Red Sea. Both of these developments represent how colonial powers followed strategic thinking to favor their interests during their presence in Egypt. And now, in terms of the level of compensation that a hypothetical return of the stone would represent, I believe that the greatest effect would be mostly symbolic, together with a greater sense of unity and national identity under the common narrative of anti-colonialism, because as I mentioned earlier, the consequences of colonial rule are perceived to this day, both in economic and social terms. For that reason, claiming back a representative symbol of the past from the former ruler could translate into a source of renewed national unity. And despite the rising role that the heritage protection agencies, including UNESCO, have played in the contemporary regulation of the antique art collections, there's still no international unified legal framework that those so-called extracted nations can pursue to claim their original artifacts. In fact, many attorneys that specialize in the matter have mentioned that repatriation is mostly on the discretion of museums. So, in my point of view, it is more of an issue of legitimacy and social pressure that has to come forward in order for museums to have incentives to give these artifacts back. We need to hold museums accountable to fully disclose how artifacts from different cultures around the world ended up in their exhibits, allowing for contrasting views and face the rising issue of repatriation, of course, because if they fail to do so, I think the whole idea of globalization, trade, and exchange that sort of legitimizes the presence of these objects in the permanent exhibitions of Le Louvre, of the British Museum, or El Prado in Madrid will just fall apart. And to add up, I think that although repatriation is the most desired outcome in a controversy regarding the national heritage of a foreign country, I think that there are complementary efforts that might contribute to the historical reivindication that is demanded. For instance, redesigning or including new curricular programs that focus on Egypt, just to because of this context, to promote awareness raising and develop targeted social media campaigns could be explored as means to push the agenda and provide a broader picture of the reasons behind the presence of the stone and several antique relics in museums and private collections outside of Egyptian soil, or outside of Mexican soil, or outside of First Nations soil. It is a matter of a social movement, of creating social accountability, of asking for a change, for recognition from the bottom. We need to follow a bottom-up approach in this case, because otherwise it will all be left out to the discretion of museums and to the gratitude of, if you will, of private collectors.